for more analysis, we're joined from the COP venue in Belém by Mr. Carlos Rittl, Public Policy Director for the Forest and Climate Program at Wildlife Conservation Society, and also Mr. Harjeet Singh, climate activist and founding director of Satat Sampada Climate Foundation. Welcome to Q News, gentlemen. I will start with Mr. Carlos. Mr. Carlos, COP30 is being held in the Amazon rainforest for the very first time. Why is hosting the conference in Belém so symbolic for the global climate action?
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join you and to join Harjeet in this conversation. It's every year we hear the world speaking about the urgency to address climate change and also about the role of ecosystems and nature to help us. And also we speak about the indigenous peoples and local communities, but their presence at COPs is reduced. And having a COP here is finally the opportunity for the Amazon to speak up to the world, and then for indigenous people, the local communities, not from the region, but also from around the world, to speak up and to tell the world, okay, this is what we expect you to do about climate change, and also about addressing the urgent needs to reduce fossil fuels and to reduce and to halt and reverse deforestation that is the main source of greenhouse gas emissions in countries like Brazil.
Mr. Harjeet, climate change adaptation is set to be a key theme in Belém. What are some practical adaptation measures that countries need to prioritize?
Thank you very much for having me and asking this question about adaptation, which is such an important priority for developing countries who are already facing climate impacts. The reality is that they are not prepared to deal with these challenges, be it increasing incidences and intensity of floods and storms. And we are also seeing how sea level rise is affecting people's lives, livelihoods, and swallowing land permanently. So the world is not ready, and developing countries certainly have a huge capacity gap, and the money that is required for them to climate-proof the development or build infrastructure in a manner that is more climate resilient, or help prepare farmers to deal with the climate variability and have more research in climate resilient agriculture. So some of those things definitely require resources, and especially when you want to make sure that your infrastructure is made for all weather scenarios and increasing disasters, it would require additional resources. The reality is that, as per the United Nations report, that the resources that are being provided from the international system are 12 to 15 times less than what we need at this moment, which is about $300 billion annually in developing countries alone. So adaptation definitely is a key priority at this COP, but we want to make sure that the money that is provided for adaptation is public finance and not private sector money, which is going to be only looking at making profits, or loans that are going to make developing countries more indebted, and they are already facing the debt crisis.
Yes. Mr. Carlos, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing this year's negotiations in Belém? Is it only the financial aspect, as mentioned by Mr. Singh, or are there other challenges facing this year's COP30?
President Lula has just delivered his speech at the plenary, and it's called this the COP of Truth. This means exactly addressing the major finance gap, including the finance gap for adaptation. So countries need to walk their talk and deliver their promise since the convention was established, the Paris Agreement, and all the decisions that we had in recent years, how to fulfill this immense finance gap that exists, and provide clarity on the source of financing, especially on the participation of the public finance to fill this gap. In addition, President Lula brought this up a couple of times these last few days, including today. He mentioned that this is an opportunity to bring the commitments made in recent COPs, including COP28 in Dubai, that promise to put on a path on the transition away from fossil fuels and halting deforestation on track. And so to start the walk towards roadmaps to end up fossil fuels dependence and to the middle of the century, and also how to halt deforestation in the time frame that has been promised since at least the Glasgow a couple of years ago, when the countries promised that they would reach 2030 with zero deforestation. And so COP has the opportunity to address those gaps and put us back on track, and then to mobilize everyone to do what is needed.
Mr. Harjeet, Brazil's President Lula da Silva called this a conference of truth. In your own view, what truths about climate change does the world still need to face now?
When President Lula refers to the truth, he is talking about countries who are denying climate science, who are not taking action as per their fair share. So, of course, there is a direct reference to the United States, which has pulled out from the Paris Agreement. And instead of taking climate action, the United States is promoting fossil fuels, which are the primary drivers of the climate crisis. As we know that after the agreement at COP28, as it was just mentioned, that we need to move away from fossil fuels, but some are denying science and their role in taking climate action so that we can avert the crisis and support countries who want to make that transition and also deal with climate impacts. But that truth needs to be told, that how certain countries are backtracking and rather derailing climate action when it is required the most.
Mr. Carlos, Brazil is putting indigenous peoples and forest protection at the heart of this year's summit. Why is that such an important shift?
Well, indigenous peoples are the best guardians of nature worldwide. And we are in the Amazon. There are more than 400 indigenous people, different groups, speaking more than 300 languages. And their role is not only very important to protect the ecosystem, but this has an immense impact for the climate emergency. It brings together mitigation and adaptation. If you look at what happens in indigenous territories in Brazil, the rates of deforestation are almost insignificant. And it only happens when we have invaders of those lands, the forest to expel the communities from those territories. So recognizing their role and also their knowledge, I think is very important, and bringing their knowledge, that traditional knowledge that has addressed challenges over thousands of years at the same level of the scientific knowledge, and bring both together. It's an unique opportunity that happening in the Amazon.
Mr. Harjeet, after a decade of limited progress, what concrete outcomes should we hope to see from this year's summit?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, because we are living in a scenario where the trust level is absolutely rock bottom, and many questions are being raised on the importance of this process. But I must say, despite all the criticism, we have to make sure that this system delivers. And our absolute top priority is the establishment of what we are calling BELEM action mechanism, or BAM, which is a mechanism to coordinate the global just transition efforts and to make sure that the projects are supported with new, additional and non-debt creating finance. It is extremely important, as Carlos was also saying, we need to move away from fossil fuels. We need a just transition, but it would require money, it would require exchange of knowledge, it would require those policies which are going to help countries adopt more renewable energy, and definitely finance. And beyond just transition, of course, we need finance for adaptation, as I just mentioned, which is not sufficient at this moment. We also need money that needs to go to the newly created loss and damage fund, which was a hard-won victory, but really doesn't have sufficient resources to make sure that countries and communities who are facing the climate crisis now get support, and public finance in general, to make sure that even those mitigation actions that are required cannot happen unless there's a base of public finance. And of course, the fossil fuels, we got that decision at COP28 to transition away, but no concrete action. It's not even being discussed in a manner that you can hold those countries to account and turn that decision into a plan. And all that needs to happen based on equity and fair share. Not all the countries can move away from fossil fuels today. Some countries who have a large historical responsibility, but they also have more resources, they need to do that much more now. So we are living at a time when we need to make sure that we move away from fossil fuels, but also protect people from climate impacts. And that's why this system is really important. And that's why we are also calling for a fossil fuel treaty, which should complement the efforts being made here so that countries get support for that just transition.
Yes, that's very important. Mr. Carlos, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. How effective do you think the world has been in meeting its targets so far?
Well, the Paris Agreement gave us a north. We have a clear goals there. Limited global warming to 1.5. This is to prevent us to face much worse scenarios than the one that we are facing right now. Just a couple of days ago, city in the south of Brazil has had a strong tornado, the strongest ever, that destroyed 90% of their houses. And so we can say that, yes, we are moving. The Paris Agreement gave us a direction. We are moving in that direction, but much slower than we should in terms of reducing emissions and also on mobilizing the means of implementation that the most vulnerable, the poorest countries in the world that has zero responsibility need to do both, to act on mitigation and adaptation.
Mr. Harjeet, the world has already warmed nearly ½ degree Celsius in the past decade. How alarming is that trend, and what does it mean for the future?
Well, I must say, we are already seeing those impacts. As we speak, we know how the Philippines is being battered by an unprecedented storm, which is not only taking lives, but also affecting people's livelihoods and their resources.
True.
We also saw a devastating disaster in Jamaica, and we are not able to support people who are already facing these impacts. Sea levels are rising, and we are seeing drought conditions in Africa. And we are also seeing how glaciers are melting. I come from South Asia. We have the Himalayas, and we have seen some devastating, unprecedented impacts. So it's already happening. It's not now only about the future. It's about taking action now, moving away from fossil fuels and supporting communities and countries. So we are living in a 1.6 degree warmer world. Of course, I would not say we are completely lost on that 1.5 degree target, but definitely it is slipping away much faster than we thought. So we need urgent action. We need to recognize the challenges that we are facing. And I must mention, not only developing countries, of course, they have least resources, they are least responsible, but even developed countries are facing unprecedented and devastating wildfires and heat waves and so on. We need to wake up. And developed countries have a larger responsibility to act both by taking action at home, but also providing financial and technological resources to developing countries.
Okay. Mr. Carlos, President Lula da Silva has launched a new international initiative to protect endangered forests. What makes this proposal different from past efforts, in your own opinion?
Thank you. This is a Tropical Forest Forever facility. It's an investment-based mechanism that aims to attract investments, reinvest, and part of the profits would then be used to pay for the performance of countries of tropical forest countries if they meet the livability criteria, keeping low deforestation rates, and also giving at least 20% of the funds to indigenous peoples and local community groups. And this is, I think, the most important innovation. The indigenous peoples and local community groups, the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, were invited to design this mechanism and to discuss first how this can strengthen their rights and protect their rights, and second, how can this really grant direct access to this at least 20% of the proceeds of the funds that countries will receive through their performance. And I think this is extremely important. For the first time, these groups are invited to sit at the table and not to listen oh, this is what we created for you. No, their voice were listened and heard, and this is the way they want to be designed, and so the design reflects that. I think there's two aspects of these innovative finance that can help more than 70 countries around the world if they are performing and protecting forests and also protecting the rights of indigenous peoples, also to get further support for this challenge, to face that challenge.
Mr. Harjeet, many experts say that the 1.5 Celsius goal is slipping out of reach, and you just told me that it's happening so fast and it doesn't cope with the action needed in order to face it. So is there still a realistic path to achieving it?
I would say that hope is not lost, but definitely we are at a very critical time and we need to take action urgently. And that means that we should stop all kinds of fossil fuel expansion and exploration now, because we cannot allow even an additional barrel that is extracted and then burned, which is going to further exacerbate the climate crisis. So it's absolutely fundamental to phase out fossil fuels in a just and equitable manner. And that is something which is not getting as much attention as it is required. Of course, President Lula has said that we need to work on it, but many countries, the rich countries who are rather backtracking and going to use fossil fuels until 2050, in fact, they have some of the largest fossil fuel expansion plans. They need to be held to account. They need to be called out. So the only way we can do it is by taking concrete action on phasing out fossil fuels and phasing in renewable energy to displace fossil fuel expansion and use.
Mr. Carlos, President Donald Trump has dismissed climate change as, I quote and unquote, hoax. How has that stance affected international cooperation and U.S. credibility on climate?
Oh, the president of COP30 has just opened the COP officially, and in his initial remarks, he said this would be a COP guided by science. The International Panel on Climate Change was established just before the establishment of the Convention to combat climate change, the UN Convention. And I think there's a very good, let's say, convergence among the parties here that we need to be guided by science. There are challenges, of course, but most of those who are here, most of those heads of state have joined President Lula during the Leaders Summit last week. We were speaking about science. And us, civil society organization, I'm working on one organization that is science-based and will be, I'm sorry, would be also ensuring the outcomes of this COP will reflect science. So sorry.
Mr. Harjeet, many countries are scaling back green policies amid economic pressures, if there are even political pressures. So is the world losing its sense of urgency on climate action?
Well, it is time that we stop looking at climate and development and economic growth as competing interests. They are rolled into one. In fact, if we avoid ecosystem-centered development, if we avoid looking into integrating climate lens into our development, we are going to see development getting eroded. And that's what we have seen when development did not take into account climate risks. So they go hand in hand and they are not against each other. We need to make sure that the current development and economic growth is in harmony with nature. Otherwise, we are going to see more impact on the economy and people. So we need to make sure that climate change and environmental protection are an integral part of the development planning and economic growth. Only then it's going to be sustainable. So it is a complete misconception that we think that climate action is against development or against economic growth. It's actually the other way around. If you ignore climate, you are going to see more impact on the economy and people.
Definitely. Mr. Carlos, the Amazon, often called the lungs of the earth, is under severe threat. How urgent is it to protect this ecosystem, and what concrete steps should COP30 prioritize?
Well, we need to bring the promise made in Glasgow to end deforestation into concrete plans. And so the President Lula mentioned that we could leave Belém with a roadmap to end deforestation, and so to reach 2030 with zero deforestation. And let's walk the talk. Brazil is giving an example. Deforestation is in the Amazon, the annual rates of deforestation are going down. That have been reduced in 3 consecutive years. And so this is showing that it's possible to do. What is needed is, of course, the support from all countries. And when we speak about deforestation, we are not only speaking about a tropical forest country, tropical forest. We need also to speak about the role of the north, the global north, to how to deforestation, the temperate forest. So there's an opportunity. I think there are good examples happening in Brazil, but in other regions in the world. There's an urgent need to support countries, for example, in regions like Central Africa to address this effort. But at the same time, as you've mentioned, there's new initiatives like the Tropical Forest Forever facility that can at least help us to move in the right path. Let's push the governments to really deliver everything that is needed on fossil fuels and deforestation at the end of this COP.
Mr. Harjeet, many people have lost faith in the UN climate process. How can we restore international trust in climate action?
It is very important to differentiate between the process not working and who is responsible for it. So we cannot just blame that the UN system is failing. We need to go deep into the reasons for that.
The reasons.
This is a place where all countries are equal, irrespective of their size of country or their economy.
But the developed countries carry the weight of finding the solutions because most of the emissions come out of developed countries.
Absolutely, and they have misused this place. They have not delivered based on their fair share. They are not allowing the system to work because they know if it happens, they are going to face more pressure to act because of their historical actions. And that's why it is important to protect the space and identify those who are not allowing us to make progress as part of this multilateral process. That's what we need to do. So we are here to protect what we have in the form of the Paris Agreement or the UN Convention. But we also know that we need more processes and systems on the outside to strengthen this. That's why we must recognize the historic decision that came from the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which is remarkable, which actually holds the polluters to account and puts pressure on the states to act. We also need to make sure that we have a fossil fuel treaty which helps us look into the issue of fossil fuel phase out and just transition in a far more comprehensive manner than what Paris Agreement is doing. We also need to make sure that we have other agreements like protecting, seas and the ITLOS, that decision that came, plastics treaty and so on. So all those complementary processes are only going to strengthen this system, which definitely needs some support because developed countries did not allow it to function. So that's why it's important to talk about exactly the reason why it is not working and not blame the process.
Yes. Mr. Carlos, what would success at COP30 look like to you? What specific outcomes must happen in your own opinion?
Oh, we have, as Harjeet mentioned, we have the Belém action mechanism for just transition. We have in the agenda the tripling of finance for adaptation. We have the Baku-Belém roadmap on climate finance, and so we need a response. While this is not an agenda item of the negotiation, it's now put on the table. The role of developed countries on mobilizing finance is back on the table. Countries are starting to discuss, okay, let's fulfill this responsibility, these commitments. And also, of course, bringing once again the words from President Lula here. He said, and so he mandated his team at COP to help the conversation around the roadmap to end our dependence on fossil fuels and to end deforestation. I think this could be a remarkable progress at this COP. We have the start of the path in Belém. And so Belém delivering not the roadmap, but the process that will, in a couple of years, delivers a clear plan of action how to phase out fossil fuels and how to end with deforestation.
Mr. Carlos Rittl, Public Policy Director for the Forest and Climate Program at Wildlife Conservation Society, thank you so much. And Mr. Harjeet Singh, climate activist and founding director, Satat Sampada Climate Foundation, thank you as well so much. Thank you both gentlemen for your special insights.